Hello and welcome to the inaugural edition of Druid Nation. I'm your host, Shenka. My guest for this special Samhain edition is Selena Fox of Circle Sanctuary. Samhain was co-opted by the early Christian church as Halloween, or All Hallows' Eve. Its pre-Christian origins as the Celtic Festival of the Dead are reflected in the celebration of All Souls' Day on November 1st. This very popular holiday started out as a way to honor the ancestors, especially those who had died in the previous year. One legend has it that on this night all the souls of those who had died throughout the year walked the earth for one last time, looking for friends and relatives to take with them to the Summerlands. This is the origin of jack-o'-lanterns, which were originally carved from turnips and placed on doorsteps to frighten away evil spirits. The practice of wearing costumes on this night began in Scotland and Ireland as guising. Some say that the practice of guising was done so that the ancestors and evil spirits looking for souls wouldn't recognize friends and relatives, and so would not kidnap them and take them to the underworld. Ancestors looking for relatives to take to the beyond with them weren't necessarily acting out of evil motives. Some say that they were just looking for companionship on this long and lonely journey. Since much of the celebration of Samhain was assimilated by Christian celebrations, many of the traditions associated with Halloween are still honored by Druids and other pagans at this high day. For example, the tradition that would later become trick-or-treating began in the British Isles when children would sing a prayer for the dead door to door in exchange for cakes. Samhain is a time of ashes and fallen leaves. Most of the trees are bare, and the rest will be bare soon. As the earth prepares to sleep for the winter, we enter into a contemplative period of hibernation. It is the time to honor the goddess in her crone aspect, especially in her role as the reaper of souls. The crone is the dark goddess who devours the god so that she may take him into herself and give birth to him yet again at Albanarthon, or the winter solstice. The womb of the goddess is also the underworld, where the dead are buried. It is in this tomb that Cernunnos, the horned god, and the physical embodiment of nature, sleeps until being reborn with the coming spring. Samhain is also a time for honoring our ancestors. Ancestor vigils are common at this holiday, as are altars to loved ones who have crossed the rainbow bridge into the Summerlands. The veil between the worlds of the living and the dead is the thinnest at this time of year, so it is at this time that we are best able to peer beyond the veil and call upon the wisdom of our ancient ancestors. As the dark goddess devours the god and takes him into herself at this time of the year, we begin to turn our energies inward and enter a period of quiet contemplation and meditation in preparation for giving birth to new ideas and inspirations later in the year. It is a time of endings and letting go of less productive ways of being and doing in preparation for beginning anew. Do the work of letting go of the past and of doing things that lead to consequences that you don't want. Samhain is a good time of year for doing magic involving releasing past mistakes and unproductive relationships. It's also a good time to do magic concerning protection and security. It is a time for banishing, binding, and releasing. Since the veil between the worlds is thinnest at this season, many also choose to do their seances at this high day. A popular releasing ritual at this time of year involves writing a bad habit or a weakness on a piece of parchment or other paper and tossing it into the Samhain fire. As the ashes from the parchment rise into the sky and the ashes fall to the earth, we banish the problem from our lives. Samhain represents the third and final harvest of the year. As such, it symbolizes endings and therefore new beginnings as well. Some symbols that represent the endings and the final harvest would include apples, cauldrons representing Ceridwen's sacred cauldron of life, death, and rebirth, jack-o'-lanterns, black cats, skeletons and skulls, masks, and representations of the waning moon. The Morrigan, Phantom Queen of the Celts, is the reaper of the Druids. It is said that if you saw the Morrigan washing your clothes in a river on the way to a battle, it meant that you were doomed to die. The Morrigan is a psychopomp, meaning that she carries the souls of the dead to the Summerlands to be reborn. Caridwen, as the Crone goddess, represents the powers of death and rebirth at this time of year, as does the Lady of the Silver Wheel, Arianrhod. At this time of year in most parts of the Northern Hemisphere, the leaves are exploding with colors. Colors reminiscent of this transition from an active to a dormant state would include browns, reds, deep golds, and oranges. Black, symbolizing the dark underworld and death, would also be appropriate. A common Druid tradition at this time of year is the Ancestor Vigil. Sometimes an Ancestor Vigil is held from sunset until midnight of Samhain, and sometimes it's held from midnight of Samhain until the following dawn. The timing is a matter of personal preference. Usually an Ancestor Vigil is held by lighting candles for the ancestors and keeping a candlelit vigil. You may set up altars to your ancestors and decorate them with memorabilia such as photographs, personal items, or other mementos that remind you of your ancestors who have gone before. The vigil is held by singing songs and chanting around the fire while telling stories and remembrances of the ancestors. Some watch for signs or listen for messages that the ancestors have heard and responded. Another ancient and modern practice is leaving a plate of food on the doorstep for the ancestors. Leaving a candle in the window or apples on the ground is said to guide them on their way. When having feasts at this time of the year, one tradition is to leave out a plate at the table for a departed ancestor, especially if he or she has died during the previous year. At such a feast, those at the table take turns offering reminiscences of the departed. Traditional foods for Samhain feasts include anything from the late harvest. This could include apples, beets, gingerbread, mulled wines and ciders, dried herbs, pumpkins, squash, and turnips. Meats traditionally hunted at this time of the year are also excellent Samhain fare. This was the time for hunting boars and slaughtering pigs, so pork is particularly appropriate. In whatever way you choose to celebrate Samhain this year, may yours be a bright and blessed one.
White lace and horses, and cool October dawn. Bonfires and harvests, the leaves are almost gone. Pumpkins and pentacles, enchantments have been drawn long ago. Long ago. Fairy rings and nightshade, the frost is coming round. Candles in the window, and ashes on the ground. The other world is open, from the village out of sound. Long ago, long ago. Broomsticks and runestones, mysteries and rain. Wait for the Morrigan, and pray your soul remains. And all that has ended shall be reborn again, once again. Once again. Once again. Once again.
Hello, my guest today is Selena Fox of Circle Sanctuary. Welcome to the show, Selena.
Great to be here.
And can you tell us a little about yourself? Give us a brief bio, how you came to follow the path that you follow, and just a little of your history.
Sure. I began my pagan explorations before I even called them pagan. As a youth, I found that I had profound spiritual experiences when I spent time in natural settings.
Sounds
I've
familiar.
always had a kinship with trees and other plants and creatures and places, and that was part of my early experience of spirituality. When I was in my teenage years, I began taking the word pantheist for myself because I realized that, having been raised fundamentalist Southern Baptist, that was not a good fit for me at that point in my life's journey.
Yes, that sounds familiar, very familiar.
And simultaneously with being a Southern Baptist, I was having these nature mystical experiences. From a very early age, I also had been very interested in mythology and lore from a variety of pagan peoples, Celtic and Roman and Greek and Nordic, Germanic, Egyptian. So it had this ongoing, lifelong love of lore, mythology, connecting with the magic of nature.
Yes.
When I went into college, I studied psychology as my major, but I continued my study of the classics, Latin and Greek, and Greco-Roman peoples and their cultures. And it was when I was president of the Classics Honor Society and president of the Classics Club in my senior year at the College of William and Mary in Virginia that I did my very first pagan ritual on campus. I did it as an academic exercise, and I had the full cooperation of the entire Classics Department faculty, graduate students, and some of the undergraduate students, and we went out into a place known as the Sunken Gardens at campus in Williamsburg, Virginia, and did this rite of spring, calling on Dionysus and calling on the Mother Earth. Well, what was designed by me to be a fun, interactive, experiential, educational exercise did turn out to be the case for everyone. But for myself, it actually went beyond that. We called to the old ones, and they came. I was the priestess of that ritual, and, well, the rest is history. That's how I began my public pagan priestess ministry.
And you had mentioned your involvement with Circle Sanctuary. Could you give us a little more about the history of that organization and what it's all about?
Yeah, Circle Sanctuary is an international resource center and church that is headquartered on a 200-acre nature preserve in southwestern Wisconsin. I founded Circle Sanctuary back in 1974 to be a place that could bring together people of many paths and places to celebrate nature in sacred ways and to have mutual support and friendship. Over the years, Circle Sanctuary has grown in its various projects and endeavors, in addition to being an organization that regularly holds events at its own headquarters on Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve, which is the land where we're based. We also help sponsor events in other places. We partner with some other pagan organizations in a variety of different events, such as Pagan Pride Days, and we're very active in pagan rights work through our Lady Liberty League, endeavoring not only to fight discrimination against pagan people, but to do public education and other work to help dispel misunderstanding and bring about better relations in society as a whole.
Yes. My son is in the Army, and he served in Afghanistan and Iraq. And could you just talk a little bit about Circle Sanctuary's involvement with the monument for deceased veterans?
Yes, and thanks to your son for his service.
Yeah.
We have been involved in military ministries for pagans and their families since our earliest days back in the 1970s.
Great.
We're probably most known for our work with the Veteran Pinnacle Quest.
Yes.
For nearly a decade, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs had been given the opportunity to add the pinnacle, the five-pointed star in a circle, 1 point up, to its list of emblems of belief, so that Wiccans and other pagans that have that as their symbol of their religion and pagan practice could have it on their VA-issued grave marker after death. And essentially any veteran in the U.S. military who's honorably discharged can get a grave marker from the VA as a benefit of having served. And this not only applies to those who are killed in action, making the ultimate sacrifice, but to those who have served and then retired from their military service and then died years later. I was involved in this quest throughout that decade, the first number of years, myself and other people with Circle Sanctuary and the Lady Liberty League were being supportive of other organizations that had already put in the application to have the symbol added to the list of authorized symbols that could be included on these grave markers that the VA issues. In 2005, after a number of groups had tried and not gotten anywhere, we decided to go from a supporting role into an active role, going on the front lines of this quest, to be quite honest. And we applied, sent in our own application, and began our own journey with the VA. They changed their protocols for how to get a symbol on the list later that year. And one of our longtime members, who was a veteran of the Korean War, died shortly after the VA had issued its new protocols. And the new protocols required there to actually be somebody who had that faith symbol, who had served, to be deceased, and they have the next of kin request that. So we were able to apply again under the new protocols. And even though we gave the VA everything and more of what was needed under the much more stringent and complicated protocols at the time, they still did not add the pinnacle to the list. A woman named Roberta Stewart, who was part of a much larger network of people that we had been providing networking services to across the country, and she was in Nevada at the time, had her husband killed in action in Afghanistan in the war on terrorism in what's known as Operation Enduring Freedom. He died on September 25th of 2005. It took her a while in her grief process to finally decide that she wanted to get a VA marker that was due her husband. And she wanted that marker put next to the marker of his very best friend who was piloting the Chinook helicopter that was shot from the sky by enemy fire. When she went in to get her plaque for her husband, she wanted a pinnacle on it because it still had not been added to the list authorized of authorized symbols by the VA. She was told she could get the plaque, have it there, but she couldn't have the symbol on it. Well, her grief was already very deep. She was starting to heal a bit, and that not only angered her, but really complicated her grief.
Yeah.
She happened to know of our work because she was connected with people that were actively on our network at the time. She and I had a conversation. She became aware that we had already applied not once but twice under the latest protocols. And when I talked with her and we made plans to have her application for the symbol to be added to the list, added to our packet, I asked her, I said, Roberta, are you willing to work with government officials? Oh, yeah. Are you willing to take this story public if we need to do that? She said, yes. I said, well, let's go for it and let's get this done. The original person, the widow of the original veteran who had died that made it possible for us to apply under the new protocols, really didn't want a lot of publicity by Roberta deciding that she wanted the symbol on the list and wanted to honor her husband in that way, and her willingness to take the story public really helped. And she became the face of the Pinnacle Quest because here is someone who was part of a pagan military family whose husband was killed in action, who is a Desert Storm veteran,
Yeah.
and not to be able to have the symbol of her faith and his faith on his marker, because the VA had been delaying and delaying and delaying and just not getting it done, was really horrific. But I want to celebrate her courage and her willingness to not only work with me and the government officials, but to take her story public, because we thought it was important to take it to the court of public opinion.
Yeah.
The only time I really have actively sought any kind of media attention for anything, but we really felt we needed to do it because our work within the executive branch and the legislative branch wasn't bringing us success yet.
Yeah.
We ended up suing the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Circle Sanctuary versus Nicholson was the name of the case.
Yeah.
Not just in one court, but in two federal courts. Americans United for Separation of Church and State represented us. I want to thank them for their work, because they provided us free legal representation.
Wow.
And the good news is that after many, many months of media work and work with government officials and meetings in Washington and meetings with our attorneys and interviews with the press, finally the VA decided to add the pinnacle to the list. And on April 23rd, 2007, it got added to the list. And part of the conditions of the settlement, before I would sign off on it as the representative of Circle Sanctuary, which was the one that was in corrective feedback processes with the VA. Before I sign off on it, I made sure that provisions were made to get those markers produced before Memorial Day.
Yeah.
So Sergeant Patrick Stewart got his VA marker, and 3 other families got their marker. First 4 markers were delivered on May 1st, 2 to Arlington National Cemetery and 2 to Circle Cemetery. And I have just heard from the VA recently. Periodically, I do some follow-up with them to see how many markers have been issued. And more than 100 markers with pinnacles have been issued by the VA in a little more than 5 years since the symbol went on the list, and they're in both private and public cemeteries across the USA.
Fantastic. Great. I really salute your work with that, especially, having a son who has served. And you mentioned the Circle Cemetery. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we are one of the first green cemeteries in the United States. We were founded in 1995, and that was the year we had paid off our land, because I wanted to make sure that we had the title before we started scattering cremains, burying cremains, and a few years ago we expanded our cemetery so we could do full-body burials as well.
Yes.
A green cemetery combines a very old pagan burial practice, no embalming, and having the bodies or the cremains go back into the earth with the preservation of green space. There are more than 36 green cemeteries in the United States now. And certainly there's some old cemeteries where bodies were naturally buried, but they were not intentionally buried with the idea that nature conservation would be happening. So that's the new piece to green cemeteries. Old practice, but we're really looking at sustainable greening the end-of-life practices.
Yes, yeah.
And we are the first green cemetery to be established in Wisconsin. We have Veterans Ridge, which is part of our cemetery, and that's where the 8 pinnacle markers from the VA that the VA has issued so far to those connected with us are. And we also have a natural burying ground
Yes.
Most of those with bodies or cremains in our cemetery are pagan, but we are open to people of many faiths and beliefs that have a philosophy that honors nature. So
Yeah.
we are interreligious as well as being America's first national pagan cemetery.
Yes, you kind of anticipated my next question there is, are you open to everybody? How would, if someone was interested in, I don't know if you sell plots or how that goes about, but if someone was interested in that, how would they go about investigating
What they
that?
should, they can go to our website, www.circlesanctuary.org/cemetery, and get some more information that way, and then make direct contact with our office by either emailing circle@circlesanctuary.org or by calling our office 608-924-2216.
Okay, great. And something else I wanted to talk to you about was the Pagan Spirit Gathering. I understand that's one of the largest, if not the largest, gatherings in the United States. Could you say a little about that?
Yes, Pagan Spirit Gathering is a week-long celebration of pagan spirituality and the summer solstice. It began in 1980. It has been held at a variety of different locations over the years. It was in Wisconsin for a number of years. It was in Ohio, Missouri, and most recently in northern Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
We have authors from many different pagan traditions speaking, as well as other teachers and pagan leaders doing workshops, facilitating rituals, facilitating discussions, doing specific trainings in different areas. We have a youth program. We have vendors, arts and crafts people, and have a whole magical marketplace as part of our gathering. And like
Nice.
many gatherings, we have dancing and drumming around bonfires. We have pagan musicians that are doing concerts, as well as informal sessions together, jamming, sharing music, creating music together. Pagan
Yes.
Spirit Gathering, in many ways, is what I've called my ongoing utopian pagan social psychology experiment.
Yeah.
We have certain principles that we all agree to by registering for the gathering, respecting each other, respecting different paths, respecting nature, some really basic values.
Yes.
And we seek to walk our talk, to live our values
Yes.
with all this convergence of diversity and be in good relation with each other for the week. Well, we've always held it in some type of natural setting, sometimes private land, sometimes a campground, sometimes, most recently, it's a reenactment venue site. And what we endeavored to do is be in good relation not only with each other, but that larger circle of the natural world that are part of which we're connected with. And we have been doing this since 1980, and it's grown a lot. This year, in 2012, we had our largest Pagan Spirit Gathering yet. We had over 1,000 people.
Wow.
And it's not only people from across the United States. While it's primarily a national gathering, since its beginnings, we've had people from at least one or other countries, and we regularly now get people not only from Canada, but across the waters. So it's really exciting to have a bit of that convergence of paganism as world religion and world people right together in the United States at the summer solstice event.
Yeah, speaking of across the pond, the way I first heard about the Pagan Spirit Gathering was through Dave the Bard's website. He was playing there, so you have people from all over.
He's great, and we've had many great discussions about Druidism and paganism. We had a panel at the Pagan Spirit Gathering, also known as PSG, this past year on paganism around the world. And he and his wife were among the panelists. I was there, Patrick McCollum, Margot Adler. We had a variety of different people. Ed the Pagan from Pagans Tonight Radio Network. And what we endeavored to do was share our perspectives and our experiences traveling around the world and connecting with pagans in different community settings. It was really fascinating. And I really do think that's one of the future directions of paganism, to have those of many places find even more ways of sharing information and support with each other.
Yeah, so Dave was on the show, and he was talking about he travels quite a bit as a musician, and that he could go any place in the world, and there was a common spirit there in the pagan communities across the world for all of the places that he's traveled, and that's great to hear.
I agree.
And you had mentioned that you have several Druidic practices that you engage in, and most people know you more as I don't know if you would call it Wiccan, but maybe eclectic Wiccan. Could you say a little more about your own Druidic practices?
Yes, I really see my practice of what I am now calling circlecraft is not only drawing on traditions that those who might prefer to call their path Wicca or witchcraft have some commonalities with, but Druidism and heathenism is also part of the mix. And part of that is that the circlecraft tradition, which I helped birth many years ago, is a convergence of both old forms of paganism and new forms. And with my own background in the mental health sciences, there's not only shamanism and that form of healing, but transpersonal psychology is part of the mix.
Yes.
The Druidism, for me, came from a very early age and pretty much relates to the practice across many different Druid traditions and paths of having sacred relationships with trees.
Yes.
And from the very earliest age, it's less tree worship, it's more tree communion, and seeing trees as wisdom carriers, plants that we can have relationship with, but it's less us being in charge of tree management, more developing a mutually respecting and connecting relationship with these other beings in our world.
Yes.
As I have done ancestral research, both genealogical as well as doing meditative and shamanic journeying to connect with my biological ancestors, I have come to know about some Druidic connections from the past, in particular on my father's mother's side, one of the families from old Scotland has roots connected with honoring the divine as Brige or bride. They were keepers of her holy place, one of her places in Fife, Scotland, and I still have relatives in that part of the world to this day.
Yes.
And I found out about that much later, after I had already been connected and starting to do work with that particular form of the divine. So whether you call her bride, Brige, Bridget, or by some other of her many names, she has been very much important part of my own spiritual work and part of my own practice of pagan spirituality with her connects me not only with Wiccans that work with her and Druids that work with her, but Christians that work with her as Saint Bridget.
Yes.
When I was when I was at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Cape Town, South Africa in 1999, I was one of the speakers at this international interreligious conference, and I gave a presentation on Bridget as Celtic goddess and Christian saint. And I got a lot of people turning out, not just the pagans, as you would expect, that were there from a number of different countries around the world. But yes, I had Roman Catholic nuns, and I had people from other religions as well. Yeah. What I thought was really wonderful was there was an international celebration of the divine feminine, and it was just really fabulous to see that sacred force, that goddess, being not. I saw myself as just a vehicle in which to have her power and her lore and her wonderful magic being made available to more people. So it was wonderful to see people have an interest in the divine feminine and in her in particular. So part of my own personal Druidic practice is very connected with her, and one of the trees connected with her is the oak. And on my father's side, I am from the Bissett clan, which has as its symbol a great oak that's been cut off but is sprouting green again. My very first pagan publication, Circle Magic Songs, a little songbook of some music that myself and my previous partner, who helped start Circle with me, Jim Allen, I reproduced the family crest that was brought over from Scotland way back in 1700s and 1800s. At least we know it goes back that far. When my great-grandfather came over from Scotland, he brought a reproduction of that image. Yeah. And so for me, it's a personal family symbol to have that oak sprouting green again. But the reason I put it in Circle Magic Songs, the songbook, is, to me, it's a symbol of paganism. Not just Druidism, but paganism as a whole, and how we're growing green again. Yeah. We are sprouting forth and growing again.
As far as your ancestors, this is the Samhain episode, and one of the topics that we discuss is the ancestors. How do we honor the ancestors? And Druids have a pretty strong tradition of honoring the ancestors, and I know you incorporate some Druidic elements into your practice. So do you have any particular things that you do to honor your ancestors at this time of the year?
Yes, one of the things that I do each year at Samhain is to create a special Samhain ancestors altar.
Yes.
And I put on the altar photographs of ancestors, as well as objects that I've had passed down to me. So I have some heirlooms, I have some photographs, or for ancestors that I've been fortunate enough to get images of before the advent of photography. I will have some reproductions of some paintings and some other renderings of ancestors, and I gather these ancestral mementos and place them on a fairly large altar in my home. Yeah. In the center, I have a plate and a chalice and a votive candle. During the course of Samhain, which I do what I call the time-release Samhain.
Yeah.
Yes, some people will celebrate it on the October 31st date in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yes.
Some Druids that I have friendships with will actually celebrate it at the full moon closes, and we do have a Samhain full moon this year.
Yes.
And some will actually celebrate it more like November 6th or 7th. Well, for myself, I start celebrating Samhain and setting up altars and decorating my home. Coming around the time of my birthday, which is October 20th, and then carry that Samhain celebration through pretty close to the 7th or 8th of November, and then I shift gears and honor Veterans Day. So we kind of shift in a different way. So I have an altar. I take some of the food and the beverages that are served at different meals during the Samhain time, and I place them on that place setting.
Yeah.
And then towards the end of the Samhain celebration, and sometimes it's October 31st and sometimes it's November 1st, I will take those offerings and I will place them out in a sacred place outdoors.
Yes.
I also have Samhain as a time of doing what I call ancestral portal work.
Mm-hmm. Could you say more about that?
Personal rituals, group rituals. I will have a time during a ceremony in which I specifically honor all ancestors, but then do some linking in with a particular ancestor.
Yes, okay. Sounds fantastic. We do something which we call the Ancestor Vigil, where we light candles and tell stories about our ancestors who have gone on. And but other than that, we do a great deal of similar practices to what you do. So do you find that that's a common way of doing this throughout the world with the people that you've talked to?
Yes, I've been over the last few years have been developing even more ancestor workshops and ceremonies, not only for my personal use, but that I've presented at different festivals. I have a radio show called Circlecraft Study that happens on Tuesday nights, and one of the things I'll be doing this year is, also doing a kind of ancestor workshop on the air, and then there'll be a podcast where people can listen later, whenever that might be. So I see ancestral connections and reverence, honoring, and communion as something that can be a connecting and common ground for pagans of different paths.
Yes, yes.
I also find, as part of the ancestor work that I do, and when I'm doing ancestor workshops, I point out three aspects of the ancestors, three types of the ancestors. There are ancestors of family and blood. So whether we're adopted into a family or we're biologically descended from ancestors in a family, they would be the family ancestors, and I make a point of learning about at least some more information about one particular family ancestor every Samhain.
Oh, okay.
This year, in the night, in preparation for this show, I was up doing some meditation in the middle of the night, and a very distant cousin that I met via the internet had sent me a packet, and I opened it up at that time, and lo and behold, for the first time, I saw a picture of my great-grandfather, David Bissett, from Scotland.
Ah, okay.
It is now sitting on my ancestors' altar.
Okay.
And so I do some work to try to get more family history, whether it's getting a photograph or getting a tale or looking over materials that I already have, or going out on the internet and doing Google searches. I endeavored to do something with family ancestors as part of my Samhain work. And most people I know who do ancestor work during Samhain really focus on a family ancestor or family ancestors as a whole. But I've found, as part of my practice of what I call ancestor magic, that there are two other kinds of ancestors that we can also honor at this time of year. One of those would be ancestors of place and culture.
Yes.
And those of us who are Americans, for example, would look at who are our national heroes who have crossed over.
Yes.
Who are those who, and so whether it's founding father, founding mother, those could be construed as ancestors. And indeed, when I was doing work on the Veterans Pinnacle Quest, I not only called on a family ancestor, James Kinsey, who was part of the First Continental Congress, and Colonel John Weems, who was with George Washington in the Revolutionary War, and Philip Barr, who was with him at Valley Forge, and a number of other Revolutionary War ancestors. I called on founding fathers and founding mothers of our country as ancestors to help with the quest.
I have just enough Cherokee blood in me to say I have a little Cherokee blood in me. And one of the discussions that we got into was, okay, if we bring all of our Celtic gods to America, there are Cherokee gods and Cherokee spirits of place. Do we honor them, or are there just different names for the same spirits and the same gods? And so that's, I'm not trying to get into a debate about that, but I think it's an interesting concept that do you honor the spirits of place in the place that you find yourself, or how does that work?
Well, and I find that another interesting connection between you and me, because we both have ancestors that in America with European roots that go back to the 1700s, early ancestors. But I also am part Cherokee.
Great.
So in addition to having a picture of my great grandmother, who had Cherokee ancestry on my ancestors' altar, I honor and work with Cherokee ancestors as part of my family connection, but being part of Native American powwows and other events where I'm connecting with people of a number of different tribal traditions. I pay respects to those ancient ones of America that went before, whether I'm genetically descended from them or not. I lived in a forest which is part of the forest that goes into Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve. I have land that adjoins Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve. And at the gateway between our property and the Circle Sanctuary property is some ancient Indian places. When I do ancestral work there of ancestors of place, I pay respect to those ancient peoples that most likely I am not genetically descended from, but I consider them a kind of ancestor as well, because their spirits are within the land. And I'm now living on the land, and if I'm going to be working with the spirit of place, I'm going to be working with that spirit of place not only in the here and now, but through the ages, into the past, as well as into the future, because how we relate to the land in the present does impact the future. So I'm certainly, I guess, in that whole exploring how to deal with cultural ancestors and ancestors of place. For me, that is also an important part of ancestral practice.
And this is going to sound like a tangent, but I'm hoping to tie it all together here. You and I, you mentioned your psychology major. I actually came to, I'm a family therapist myself. I came to that from my pagan practices. Somebody at one of the gatherings I was at way early on had mentioned Carl Jung and his work with the collective unconscious and those types of archetypes and things like that. And I started reading him and said, hey, maybe I need to do this for a living. But the idea behind that is his idea of the collective unconscious, and that we're all linked together at some level. And the knowledge and the wisdom of the ancestors is buried deep within our unconscious minds, and that we have access to that when we honor those ancestors, that sort of thing. I'm probably paraphrasing quite a bit here about his original intent was, but...
Well, and I know that certainly in my studies of Jung and being able to see some reproductions of some of his books and I have some of his writings, and I've also seen a beautiful illuminated manuscript that he put together as kind of his own private spiritual journal,
the Red
magical.
Book. Yes.
Yeah, I first saw that when I was in Amsterdam a year or so ago, and it was in one of the bookstores in one of the shops, and
Yeah.
I was just struck by how beautiful it was and how much he had those powerful symbols depicted within the book as part. So the words, yes, important, but seeing the beautiful images that transcend any language barrier, how powerful is that?
Yes.
Well, the third part of ancestors that I work with as part of ancestral work at Samhain is spiritual ancestors.
Yeah.
And while Carl Jung wouldn't necessarily call himself a pagan,
Yeah.
he certainly has been among those in my own spiritual practice that has informed my understanding of spirituality, and I would consider him a spiritual ancestor.
Yes.
So I encourage people, whatever their tradition that they're practicing, to look at those who've gone before. In fact, in among some pagans, there has been a movement to try to gather together the names of pagan leaders and teachers from a variety of different organizations and traditions who have died, and to have that list of names available not only to read for those people who do that kind of work as part of their rituals, but
Yeah.
just to be aware of those who have gone before. And certainly as part of our Samhain gatherings, we have a time in our big community ritual, and I'm generally the facilitator of this part, where we open an ancestral portal, we pay respects to our own personal loved ones who are now in the realm of the dead, but we'll pay special respects to those, whether we're related to them or not, who have been part of our spiritual life, who have crossed over in the past year. And certainly in this past year, a number of pagan elders have crossed, and so our naming of them is going to take a bit of time.
Yes. Our order is particularly involved in trying to recapture Celtic shamanism. And I was just wondering how much work you've done in that area, and if you would like to speak a bit on that.
Yeah, it's definitely near and dear to my heart. And I find that my experience of shamanism has, in addition to working with it in a more universalist, multicultural way, that particular forms of culture that are part of the path that I walk, and the Celtic path is part of that, I will endeavor to not only learn, but to share what I've learned, to share the stories with others, to be able to tell stories, to do libations and other offerings, and the languaging around the other world, or some call it Anavan, depending on whether you're from a Welsh tradition or some other path, or the Tir Nonog, the land of eternal youth. I do think that part of the work that one can do in shamanic spirituality of a Celtic form is to really look at survivals of ancient practices that have come down to us in lore and in legend, in the stories, in the art, and using those as portals for connecting with the wisdom and the peoples and the practices of the past. Yes, we aren't going to recycle all the ancient practices, but certainly I find when I go to Bridget Spring or Bride Spring or Breed Spring at Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve, named after that Celtic goddess, not only of smithcraft and healing and inspiration, but she was a goddess of the sacred waters.
Yes.
And we have a spring that bubbles up year-round. In addition to physically going to the spring, putting ribbons and strips of cloth around the spring, as was done in some call it clothy or clothy customs, of well-dressing, I see the spring as a means for entering that other world, to use it in meditation and visualization, whether I'm physically present at that spring or not. And I do think that the idea of offering, the idea of sharing lore, the idea of going between the worlds in an intentional and good way where one is centered and one shifts consciousness allows us not only to connect with those who have gone before in their wisdom, but to have a dynamic relationship that can help evolve our own personal practice, the practice of the group or groups of people we are part of, as well as that larger circle of paganism and humanity that we're part of.
Yes, that's another hot topic around the moot fires here is how much of that wisdom is returning now that we have acknowledged the ancestors again. It seems like we went through a period of time, and then when I say we, I mean American culture, where we didn't rely so much on the ancestral knowledge, and now we're kind of coming back to that. And what I see in the gatherings that I have experienced is that this knowledge is coming back, and all these different isolated groups are experiencing knowledge from shamanic journeying, and then getting together and finding out that these experiences are lining up with each other. So we're reclaiming.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. And I certainly, one of my lifelong passions is archaeology and the science of archaeology.
Yes.
And I certainly think it's important to physically preserve places and artifacts. But I also do what I call spiritual archaeology, which really is what you're talking about, shamanic journeying. Because there's ways of learning about a place and a people and ways of connecting with the spiritual current through consciousness work.
Yes.
But not willy-nilly consciousness work. You need to have a good structure of ritual, a good psychological foundation to shift out of rational analytical mindsets and to safely journey into, whether you call it the collective unconscious or the collective conscious, to be able to really join and connect with that. And I do think part of the reason paganism is growing so rapidly and diversifying all over the world is that people, as part of their practice, are going beyond the books, are going beyond even some set rituals perhaps that they've been taught, and really starting to do some additional alignment work. And I do think the value of ancestral honoring, in particular at Samhain, is very important because it's an opportunity to not only grow personally, but the people can grow as well. And things come forth through our journeying, through our honoring practices that can help inspire and guide and direct our future development as people.
Yes, I remember one experience in particular when I was practicing in Pensacola where we reenacted the wild hunt basically as a, just kind of a fun activity. And at some point through that, something just took over, and everybody involved in it had this great, deep spiritual experience of the other world So it happens. It does happen quite a bit.
And once you've had an experience, whether you call it a peak experience or an exceptional experience,
Yes.
mystical experience, once you've had that direct encounter with the sacred, it changes you.
Yes, it does. You can never go back. I think Dave the Bard has that in one of his songs, that now I can never go back to the way it was before, or something along those lines. It changes your perceptions and changes your consciousness. So you see the world.
Yes,
different way.
and I totally agree, and I do think that Samhain is a really powerful time of being able to look not only at the past,
Yeah.
assess the present, but be open to looking into the future, not only what might be, but what one is guided to explore. So
Yes.
a tremendous time of being able to reset ourselves, to deepen ourselves, not only as individuals, but part of a larger community.
Yes.
I do see that increasingly pagans from many different traditions, not just Druidic and Wiccan and heathen ones, but some of the hybrid paths that are there that blend different cultures or different practices together, including Christo-pagans that are blending Christianity and paganism. I really do see part of what's happening in recent years is that people are realizing in as part of invocation work, as part of intentional honoring of the divine work, to call on the ancestors.
Yes.
Increasingly, when I am doing weddings and funerals, baby blessings, and other life passages, and I customize them with, depending on the family, the individual that has come to me for assistance in that way. Not only people connected with our community, but people from other paths that may not really have a formal group affiliation. Increasingly, people have been interested in including an honoring of the ancestors as part of a life passage ritual.
Yes.
And I think that is fabulous because there you're connecting with a support system that is not just in the here and now, but it takes you across time, into the past, and, of course, the other direction, into the future.
Yes, exactly. One final question here I wanted to ask you about. This is more a down-to-earth question here. I'm sure you get the same thing. A lot of contact from people around the globe asking about how to set up a grove or set up a circle or set up a coven. One of the questions that always comes about is how do we get the funds to buy a place of our own, or to raise the money to, create a piece of land that we can do our own practices on? If that's not too personal a question, how did you come about raising the money for Soul Sanctuary?
Well, that's a great question. And as someone who has not had given physical birth to humans in this life, I've helped birth land projects.
Okay.
And so I'm a good one to ask about that.
Yeah.
I think it begins with visioning work and finding out who's going to be part of the anchors of the vision, and having a good process for making determinations of which person or persons are at the core of a land project.
Yes.
And then finding ways to have events, do some fundraising activities. That could be everything from garage sales and bake sales to writing a book and having the proceeds of said book go into a land fund.
Yes.
So I think there's a visioning, creative part of it. There is a physical plane reality of really coming up with a good business plan for that. How is the money going to be pulled together? Are you going to be a nonprofit or a for-profit organization?
Yeah.
And as I've traveled around the U.S. and some other places, I can tell you there's quite a bit of variation according to how land projects, pagan land projects, have been set up. Sometimes it's a particular person or a household or a family that owns the land, and then a community of people is formed around that. With Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve, while certainly I put a lot of my own personal time, energy, financial resources, and other resources into the project, when we set it up, I made certain that the nonprofit organization, Circle Sanctuary, would be the owner of the land.
Great.
Because I really wanted the land project to have an institutional structure that would survive me and any of the other people who helped birth it and sustain it in its early days.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly a proponent of nonprofit organization work. That said, it is important to have, as one develops an organizational structure, good conversations and planning regarding how decisions are made, what the short-term and the long-term vision is for a place.
Yeah.
And also very important in this is to connect with the spirit of place.
Yes.
And to have that spirit of the land itself to be honored and dialogued with as part of decision-making regarding what's appropriate for the place as a whole and that larger community of life that's part of the land. Before I signed the land contract, which made it possible, we did not have a lot of funds when we bought Circle Sanctuary Nature Preserve. We started buying it back in 1983 on a land contract.
Yes.
But before signing the paperwork, not only on behalf of the nonprofit organization, but I personally had to guarantee the loan as an individual.
Yes.
I was like the mommy, having to do that. Before I signed the paper, myself and Jim Allen, who was with me as high priest of Circle at the time, we went to what is now Ritual Mound the night before we had to go meet with the bankers and all of that, and we did a ritual. Yeah. We honored the land, and we communed with the land and looked to get input from the land as to whether the land wanted us.
Yes, yeah.
Not just us wanting the land, but it, to me, was a dynamic relationship. We had phenomena, which was very wonderful and a bit startling as we moved up into, and we've now built our stone circle. It's microlithic, not megalithic, but we have a stone circle atop this mound. As we faced the north corner, a spirit light appeared before us.
Oh, great.
And I carry that memory with me to this day. And as we sat on the land and did an extended journeying meditation, we got very clear messages. The land did want not only us as individuals, but wanted the organization there. We had a sense we should go for it. We did. We've had journeys along the way, but perhaps some future show will tell those tales. And I really wish the best for all those who are with land projects or wanting to birth land projects, because I do think that paganism needs to be landed in multiple places in multiple ways. When you have an ongoing sacred relationship with a particular piece of property,
yes,
deep spiritual work can happen there.
Yes,
that really can't be done without it.
True. as the old saying goes, nature is my Bible. So if you don't have the land, you don't have the Bible. So
I agree.
Yeah.
And I do think having events on a land, pagan spirit gathering began not only to bring together people to celebrate pagan diversity and summer solstice, but all the proceeds after expenses from pagan spirit gathering went right into the land project. So
Great.
part of how we were able to manifest the land and start making regular land payments is that we had an event and we were upfront what we were doing with the money with the event, and we had people giving us outright donations, but a lot of the money as we were working on our land project came from people that took part in this gathering. And I
Right.
know other land projects have held events on the land in order for that land to be sustained financially. Heartland is at the Gaia Retreat Center in Kansas,
Yeah.
near Kansas City, and they just recently paid off their land. I want to celebrate them for that.
Fantastic.
And there's all sorts of land projects around the country, and I do think that it is important that we have safe, beautiful, magical places for pagan practice.
Yes, I agree. And we're out of time, but if our listeners would like to learn more about you, would you give us your website and any other contact information you would like to give?
Yes, you can connect with me at the Circle Sanctuary website, www.circlesanctuary.org, at my website, www.selenafox.com, or my main page on Facebook, which is Selena Fox Updates. And those are some ways to connect. You can also reach me at Circle Sanctuary, circle at circlesanctuary.org. Or you can Google us, and it'll take us to one of the sites, and you'll be able to connect. I want to give thanks to you for doing this show. I want to give thanks to the ancestors of many peoples and many paths, and wish everyone a wonderful Samhain.
And thank you for being on the show, and thank you for everything you do for the pagan community.
Well, great being here, and may we all have a blessed Samhain and a happy New Year for those of us that see this as the spiritual New Year.
And same to you. Thanks.
Battle Queen of Raven Wing, guide my spirit home. You are birth and life and death. You and I are one. Morrigan of the night, guide my spirit home. Bless the land and all the earth as we are reborn. Battle Queen of Raven Wing, guide my spirit home. You are birth and life Bless the land and all the earth as we are reborn. Battle Queen of Raven Wing, guide my spirit home. You are birth and life and death. You and I are one. Oregon of the night, guide my spirit home. Bless the land and all the earth as we are reborn. Battle Queen of Raven Wing, guide my spirit home. You are birth and life and death. You and I are one. Oregon of the night, guide my spirit home. Bless the land and all the earth as we are reborn.
Druidry began in Britain, Ireland, and Gaulish France during the Iron Age, or possibly even earlier. Modern Druidry is a new growth of these old roots. This show is about modern Druidry as practiced by the Black Mountain Druid Order and by other orders throughout the world. The revival of Celtic spirituality and of Druidry has led to Druid groups and organizations all over the world. Although we all come from different parts of the planet, we all share a common interest in preserving and honoring nature. We are a nation without borders. We're a Druid Nation. Druid Nation is a production of the Black Mountain Druid Order. Since this is our first episode, I'd like to share a little about the history of the Black Mountain Order. Our order grew out of the Emerald Coast Grove of Druidry in Pensacola, Florida, which was established in the mid-1970s. Emerald Coast Grove was unique in that its members included Wiccans, Cherokee shamans, Celtic traditionalists, and even a follower of Asatru. In 1992, I left the Florida Panhandle and Emerald Coast Grove due to a career move that led me back to my hometown of Abbeville, South Carolina. I practiced as a solitary for several years until I began making contact with other pagans in the area. In 1997, a group of these pagans, including the original chief of the Emerald Coast Grove, founded what would become the Black Mountain Druid Order. Originally called Black Oak Grove, the future Black Mountain Druid Order met near the Sumter National Forest in Abbeville County. In 2000, I left Abbeville County to pursue a degree in family therapy. The original property containing Black Oak Grove's circle and meeting grounds was sold. At about the same time, the internet was becoming an effective way for pagans to network, and the Black Oak Grove continued to expand its membership. In 2001, a member from the Black Mountain, North Carolina area joined. This member generously allowed us to meet on his property near Black Mountain, North Carolina, and to honor his generosity, we renamed the Grove. Since the Grove consisted of several therapists and future therapists, as well as several members interested in shamanistic practices, the teachings of the Grove began to reflect a deeper experience of the power of the unconscious mind and the practice of shamanic journeying to the other world. The Grove's new name, Black Mountain Grove, fit well with this new direction. The name Black Mountain came to represent the vast hidden power of the unconscious mind, as well as the great wealth of hidden knowledge available in the other world. Another focus of the Black Mountain Grove was using the internet to train new students. The grove had always been spread out over a wide geographical area, so it was a natural next step to begin using the new technology to train new students. As the curriculum expanded, it grew to include the teachings that were unique and different from what most of the major Druid orders were teaching. So in 2003, a new order was formed, and the Black Mountain Grove became the mother grove of the Black Mountain Druid Order. In 2008, unfortunately, the individual who owned the property in Black Mountain moved away and sold the land. At that time, I became the chief Druid of the order, and its headquarters was moved to Greenville, South Carolina, where it resides today. In our current form, the order offers a free online Dedicant Path course which lasts a year and a day. We also hold 8 high days per year. Since we currently have no permanent home for the Mother Grove, most of these high day celebrations are in public parks or on private land. We're currently raising funds to purchase land as a home for the order. Future plans include a ritual circle, a teaching center, and a meeting house. We are a small but growing order, due largely to our commitment to offer free online education to solitary Druids throughout the world. Our primary mission is to foster the growth and development of groves through the Black Mountain Druid Order's educational programs. If you're interested in starting a grove in your area, please see our educational materials that will guide you through the process of organizing your own grove. You may find these materials on our website at www.bmdo.org. This concludes our first episode of Druid Nation. Music for this episode included Samhain, Long Ago, and To Them, Oregon. Druid Nation discusses Druidry as practiced by the Black Mountain Druid Order. The Druid community is a wide and diverse one, and we don't claim to speak for all Druids. The opinions expressed here are the opinions of the Black Mountain Druid Order, and unless otherwise indicated, are not necessarily representative of any other order or Druid or pagan group. If you are a member of an order with a different opinion, we'd love to have you as a guest on the show to discuss your own particular path. If you'd like to be a guest on Druid Nation, send an email to shenka@bmdo.org. That's SENCHA@bmdo.org. We're always looking for interesting and unique commentary, and you don't have to be a Druid to be a guest on the show. If you would like to keep informed of events of the Black Mountain Druid Order and Druid Nation Radio, sign up for our newsletter at www.bmdo.org. Druid Nation is a production of the Black Mountain Druid Order. Find us on the web at www.bmdo.org. Until next time, blessings of the gods and the non-gods.